feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We are brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Wednesday morning. It's February 5th, which means as we record this, we're a little over 24 hours out from the NBA trade deadline, which I think for the Wolves is coming at kind of a unique time within the arc of their season. It's coming after home losses to the Wizards and Kings in the last few days. A loss to a Kings team that had just traded De'Aaron Fox the day before, and a loss to the Wizards team that's just terrible. But also losses that came when the Wolves were injured. They were missing Anthony Edwards, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, and Dante DiVincenzo against the Wizards. And then Edwards and Reid returned for the Kings game, but they were still lacking some of that juice that obviously DiVincenzo and Randle bring. I got Britt Robson from Minott today here with me to talk some deadline and talk some of the Wolves' play of late. And I wanted to start with talking about how, if at all, these last two losses from the Wolves impact your thinking surrounding the deadline, given, yes, that it's two bad losses in a row, but five pretty good wins before that. How is that kind of, framing this trade deadline for you?
The losses were very sobering to me. I mean, it did make a fairly significant dent, in my opinion, of the team, because this was adversity. This was a spot of adversity, and it wasn't like they were playing teams that they can't beat, even shorthanded. And once again, we'll get into this later, I'm sure, but they had opportunities to win they became clutch games. They became games that were within 5 points of each other in the last 5 minutes of the game, and they lost them both. That's their 17th and 18th clutch losses of the season. That is the worst in the NBA. Their 13th loss having a fourth quarter lead. That is also the worst in the NBA. And I think a lot of it, again, comes down to a more general topic of dysfunction. It hones in on a time. I mean, let's face it, the canard that the NBA, they only care until the last 5 minutes is not true, never has been true. But it is also true that when it's a close game late, when it is crunch time, everything does tighten. Everything does get, it's more like the playoff style basketball. You begin to really redouble your efforts. You hone in more. And this team has not been capable of doing that very well. And last season, for example, Mike Conley on offense and Rudy Gobert on defense were stalwarts in the clutch. They were just really good. And they were good all year, obviously, but they were the veterans who kind of led the way in some respects. This year, neither one has been able to deliver that type of boost. And it gets to the idea that the trade at the beginning of training camp, scuttled the roster, made things. Joe Ingles was supposed to play regular minutes. Naz Reid was supposed to be a combo forward, playing some three at the same time. There was just a lot. Rob Dillingham was going to be the backup point guard. There was just a lot of suppositions. Jaden McDaniels was going to be a much bigger part of the offense from the beginning. A lot of suppositions that had to go by the wayside. And then replacing those suppositions was a player that takes a lot of getting used to, especially for the way this team had played. I'm talking about Randle. Both Randle and the team did admirably in their adjustments. And then you have the injuries. But there's never been a sustained traction. That 5 wins in a row is the best they've done all year, but they've also had 2 or 3 or 4 3-game losing streaks. And they're looking at a pretty tough schedule right now. So anyway, that's my preamble state of the Wolves.
Yeah, no, well, it is the framing of what they enter this deadline with. And I think, when we would have done a podcast a month ago, or when we did do a podcast a month ago, and we were talking about what it's going to be like at the beginning of February. I think that our thought at that time was there would maybe be some more smoke to this roster changing, right? And namely with Julius Randle.
Right.
And there is, as we sit here again, 24 hours before the deadline, there is not a smoke surrounding Julius Randle to the degree that we expected. And that's, I think there's a couple things behind that might have just been the way we or others were thinking about Randle and the conflicts we had with how he impacts the team now and into the future, and just kind of how I guess we've learned that Finch and Connelly and company do not have those same sort of conflicts that we do with Randle. Plus, Randle has started to make, before his injury, make a little bit more sense within the context of this Wolves team. So now, I don't know, I've never felt like this at the deadline where you are, I don't know, kind of having this sense that it feels like something needs to happen, yet it's hard to start opening up, hypothetical rabbit holes to dive into, which I'm not saying the Randle thing definitely can't happen, but I just assumed when you and I were doing a podcast on February 5th that Julius Randle would already have been traded, or we would kind of have a good idea of what that would look like. And that's not where we sit at this moment right now. So it's kind of hard for me to even open up this topic, and it kind of opens up into other topics surrounding it. But yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact the things you mentioned are all correct. But I think Randle's desirability on the market, it wasn't mentioned. And I think we thought, hey, he's not a perfect player, but he's an interesting player who might give another team a boost or whatever. Well, two things. Well, his injury obviously complicates that right now. But another thing is he is difficult to integrate. He is a weirdly shaped cog in any kind of team machine because he does some things very well and some things not well, but his most productive style of play requires adjustments from the organization. That's one thing. The second thing is he has a $31 million option, and you are not only trading for that player, you are trading for being bound by his decision on whether or not he wants to join your team next year. And that is huge in this current CBA. If you want to add $31 million to your payroll in this current CBA, you really want to know, A, that you can or cannot add it. You don't want it to be a variable. And two, you want to be really confident that that player in this current market is worth $31 million. I don't think either one of those things is certain with Randle.
I think the cog part, and I've said this before too, where I don't think Julius Randle is like a useless, juiceless player. I think there are teams or environments that he could fit into and be actually really helpful.
Yes.
What I've been saying for a while now is there is a displacement factor to the way he plays and the weird cog that he is, that I think would make more sense to fold into the offseason, right? If you and I were just like, we're running the Brooklyn Nets.
Right.
And we're like, actually, we could use a secondary score. Like, let's wait until, or Detroit, right? Who's kind of in it right now. That's probably a better example. Let's wait until the offseason when we can kind of put a roster around, Julius Randle and the style that he plays, rather than plopping him into a pre-existing, environment, which with the Wolves, we've kind of learned, when you there was ripples when you dropped him into this pond here. So I think to that end, that's why I've kind of been on without hearing things specifically about it. I just think the logic of him being moved in the off season has made more sense for the receiving team side. It also economically, I think, makes a little bit more sense, and that there'll be more flexibility out there for him to be, to be consumed into somebody's cap space or exceptions or whatever it might be. And And so people are hearing that and have come to understand that. And they're like, well, what does this mean for Nas and Nickeil? And I went through and did like a month ago, did a big like, okay, if Julius Randle opts out or is not on the team, then you can re-sign Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you can re-sign Naz Reid, and you can probably use some of the mid-level exception. But if Julius Randle stays and is on the team opting in or into the future, then you got to pick between Naz and Nickeil. That's what I was saying. And what I should have clarified a little bit more is you would need to choose between Naz and Nickeil so as to say below the second apron.
Right.
And I think when this trade deadline comes to pass, and if Julius Randle isn't traded, people are going to go, Naz and Nickeil, one or both of them are for sure gone. Probably, you would imagine that one of them gets cycled out of this. But I just want to clarify that like the second apron is not like a hard cap.
Right.
The Wolves could, there's a world where Julius Randle opts into it, right? Naz Reid signs a new contract with the Wolves. Nickeil Alexander-Walker signs a new contract with the Wolves. And yes, they're above the second apron. But the second apron stuff isn't calculated until the end of that season. And the Wolves are not going to be in the second apron 2 seasons in a row, but they might start next season in the second apron. So I just wanted to say that off the top of like, if Julius Randle isn't traded at the deadline, just for people to know that doesn't for sure mean that one or both of Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid will be free agents there. Though, kind of look at what it is. If Julius Randle's back and you're Naz Reid, are you like, wait a minute, I want to sign to be a backup? There's different. There's the economic elements of this.
Right.
And then there's the personal element of it. But I just would say, I don't think that it means anything definitive for Naz Reid or Nickeil Alexander-Walker, because we know that come the summer, things can change and somebody else on the Wolves could be moved. Mike Conley could retire, right? Whatever. There's some air for things to move. But what I wanted to ask you is, how do you think about a Nickeil Alexander-Walker trade happening tomorrow? How would you feel about that potentially happening, given that we know that there's a real world that he could be gone in the summer in an effort by the Wolves to stay underneath the second apron for next season?
Right. Well, I think obviously you really have to be smart with your value. What you're getting back has to be, like Nickeil, overvalued. In other words, I mean, it might even have to be a first round pick, or it might have to be a really good second round pick, and whatever else matches. It's not hard to match. What is he at, 4, 6?
4, yeah.
Okay, 4. I mean, it's incredible. And I see, like, who knows about any of this stuff? I don't know, but like Lonzo Ball is being offered, it sounds like he's being offered for like a couple of seconds, or the Bulls want to tear it down now, et cetera, et cetera. I see stuff like that and I go, Lonzo Ball and Nickeil, that's fairly comparable to me. And I, as much as I love Nickeil, Lonzo Ball is a gargantuan ace defender, obviously very injury prone, but has had a pretty good year. And you've got like Jalen Clark, for example, who still probably can't shoot, and it's a terribly small sample size, and we don't have any idea. And I'm not saying he's remotely as good as Na, but I am saying he's really cheap. He's on the roster, and he's a plug-in guy if Na goes. So what I'm saying here is, as much as I like Nickeil, and he is just a fantastic organization guy, if we are looking at hard realities, he is not irreplaceable, but they will have to choose wisely, and their timing is going to have to be really good on this. It may be that tomorrow is the time, provided they can get something that seems like a way to get under the apron and a way to improve your team. But I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, no, that's I get that. I do get that logic, and I've heard, if that's the bar, like if you can get a first round pick for him, you got to do it. I was just kind of thinking about it this morning. Remember when like Rui Hachimura was traded for like 5 second-round picks a couple years ago to the Lakers?
Yeah.
Is that it? Whatever. I think people know that I am the type of person who does think and understand the value of draft picks, and that you need that. And the Wolves in particular. So I'm not trying to like ignore that. My thing with Nickeil Alexander-Walker is he is currently a cheap player. I think will remain relatively cheap, and he's the type of player that I am pretty much certain can be a meaningful piece in a rotation for an NBA Finals team.
I agree. I agree with every bit of that.
And that, I don't know. Like
you don't want to give that away blithely. I get it.
That's just where I'm at. And some people are like, well, then why the hell would you trade that for a lottery protected first round pick? Well, in many ways, these draft picks, it is not trading him for some unknown thing. I hate when people say that. That's not how it works. Like draft picks are currency in this. And think about if the Wolves had another lottery protected first round pick right now at the moment, rather than just having the one that they have to trade, that opens up your possibilities in terms of trade capital currency to use. And those things are going to need to be explored. And there's going to need to be, difficult decisions or somewhat difficult decisions made around that. Like you and I, this is a much lesser version of it, but we both kind of like Josh Minott and have been intrigued by what that could be, what that could evolve into. Yet at the same time, I think about the Wolves asset situation right now and the fact that Josh Minott has not, been getting into the rotation. And if he could be traded for a couple second round picks, maybe it's worth grabbing some currency there, even though that's similarly a player I'm intrigued by. I just don't feel like with Josh Minott anywhere near as confident as I do about Nickeil Alexander-Walker,
right?
That, he could be a meaningful rotation piece in a playoffs or
and also Chris Finch doesn't shit on people very often. And
it's a good way to start a sentence right there.
And yanking him after 12 seconds on one blown defensive lapse, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. That doesn't happen out of the blue.
Yeah.
That is this history there that we won't probably ever know unless Minott wants to talk about it a year later or something. But that is the sign of a player and a coach not getting along anymore. And if that's true, and you value Finch within the organization, and enough from Tim Connelly to Anthony Edwards on down, Finch is very highly valued in this organization. Mm-hmm. That means Minott is on his way out one way or another, unless a fairly substantial piece is brokered, And so, yeah, I actually would think that if you ask me what one person on the roster is most likely to be traded in the next 24 hours, I would say Josh Minott.
Yeah, I would echo that too. I mean, I don't know what the return would necessarily be on that, but what do we just say?
He's intriguing as hell, though. He's an amazing athlete, and he's got skills.
Big.
Yeah.
Like he's 6'9", right? Like it's at least. Yeah, he's very, very tricky. I want to keep going on the trade deadline a little bit. Let's grab our first break here to let you all know that our friends at Falling Knife Brewing Company are having a Super Bowl party, obviously, this Sunday. You can purchase a ticket to it. The link for the tickets is in the show notes below here. It's $50 ticket to attend this, but what that comes with is all you can eat food, Philly cheese provided by Rectangle Pizza, Philly cheesesteaks, barbecue pulled pork sandwiches, nachos, pizza, obviously from Rectangle, chicken, all these different cheese sticks. There's a bunch of different stuff. I have it all up here on the screen right now. And with that $50 purchase, you get a pitcher of Falling Knives Tom's beer or any other two beverages. So if you're looking for something to do for the Super Bowl. We'd love it if you spent it with our friends over at Falling Knife. I think that would be a fun place to go for this one. Obviously, many of you have been to Falling Knife to watch Wolves games or come to some of our live events there. But if you're looking for something for the Super Bowl, consider Falling Knife Brewing Company. Also relevant to the Super Bowl is Prize Picks. We got the Super Bowl, and what better time, to kind of sit around, you're going to be watching that game, and maybe you're not a Chiefs fan or an Eagles fan or really care at all. It's fun to have something a little extra going on the game. I've been kind of putting together some different lineups that we've gone over. Patrick Mahomes has a free square for the Super Bowl Sunday. There's going to be other promotions there. Literally, you can open it up, any player, Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco, Xavier Worthy, receptions, rushing yards, all this sort of stuff. You just find a couple that you like, put together a lineup. And if all of the picks hit within your lineup, you are paid out accordingly. I really think this would be a fun thing to do for the Super Bowl. I know many previous Super Bowls earlier in my life, but living in a state where you couldn't find these things. It's fun to have a daily fantasy option to play some daily fantasy sports for the Super Bowl. So PrizePicks.com, PrizePicks app. Maybe you never have created a PrizePicks account. And if you do that, please use the promo code Dane. It lets them know that you came from me, but also gets you $50 into your account when you make your first $5 lineup. All right, but let's keep going. Let's keep going here a little bit on the deadline. We can talk about the Wolves too. And I know we literally have a game tonight. But I did want to talk to you about some of the other trades around the league that have been going on. You watch you're just as interested in the NBA at large, I think, as you are maybe the Wolves specifically. So I want to just get your opinion on, maybe we could start with the Luka-AD trade. One is your thought and surprise on it, but also kind of how you think this might impact the Western Conference for the rest of the season, which is obviously Timberwolves relevant there, as the Wolves have a similar record to both the Lakers and the Mavericks.
I think it scrambles it even further. And I think the Western Conference after OKC has been scrambled for most of the season. I think from 2 to, let's say, 11 or 12, if you throw San Antonio in, which you probably shouldn't have. They have Fox. Hey, Portland has won 7 of 9. You can't. It's as deep as it was last year. It is not as strong as it was last year, in my opinion. And just in terms of the middle teams don't seem as impregnable as they did. Almost every team has dropped a few in a row, had a bad stretch, had an injury, has some weird thing they have to work out. The Warriors, obviously the Pelicans, but forget them. But the Grizzlies, the Rockets have both really done well, but the Rockets have faded recently. They've lost 2 or 3 in a row. The Clippers have surprised. Now they're coming back. The Lakers have variously surged and fallen back. And the Mavs, of course, are probably the poster for what are they going to do? How are they going to look? They have a lot of potential on paper to emerge from this Luka thing, given that Luka's been out for a month and a half already, or, I guess, probably about a month and a half now. But
Christmas, yeah.
Yeah. So if you assume that what they've done is just added Anthony Davis, and then that's an interesting team right now. I don't know how Gafford, Lively, and Davis go together, but I do know that's a nice problem to have.
Just like Rudy, Cat, and Nas, right?
I don't know, but I think that losing Doncic is huge, and I think that anybody who saw the Western Conference Finals last year would know that if Luka Doncic wants to beat you from 40 feet, he will. Mm-hmm. That's pretty amazing, given the fact that he can get into the paint and make choices as to whether or not he wants to. hit the guy in the corner, throw a lob, or roll to the hoop himself. And his gravity was relatively unstoppable. Yeah, it really helped that he had Gafford and Lively and obviously Kyrie. And he's got 3-point shooters on the corners. But he is one of the 4 or 5 best players in the NBA. There's just isn't any, and he's 25 years old. I mean, the whole idea that I've read a couple things lately where the Mavs are trying to damage control with, conditioning or, he wasn't going to sign here anyway. Hey, no, come on. It's you got a 25-year-old superstar who has dramatically elevated your team ever since he stepped onto the court and isn't getting worse. He's getting better. When he had different personnel around him after the trade deadline, they totally changed the way they played, but his effectiveness was not affected. He was as valuable, if not more valuable, playing a totally different style. He's still a little bit of a jerk with the refs, but not as bad as he used to be. And certainly when it matters in games, he tends to business. On the other hand, as much as I have admired Anthony Davis when he wants to play and is playing well, he is incredible. He's one of the best defenders. He's a very KG-like defender, and that's the highest praise I can give a defender in the NBA. There are times when he drops out. Yeah. There are times when a minor injury becomes a nagging injury to him. He's not somebody who mentally has a great pain threshold. And he is also somebody who, even though he is always effective, even at a floor level, his floor is still an effective player. He doesn't hit the close to the ceiling level often as he should. And so I think that, and he's 6 years older. So, I mean, it was a terrible deal for Dallas, a great deal for the Lakers. And the Lakers are formidable. I mean, LeBron trying to get one more ring, Luka on what will be a revenge tour, and a whole bunch of guys who are always going to be third bananas anyway, running around the court being enabled by one of the greatest distributors the game has ever seen. I mean, that's pretty damn good.
It's funny with the revenge tour thing. This is not, we're doing this 3-4 days afterwards, and there's been which I totally agree. Like, clearly, if you just look at Luka's face at that press conference yesterday, like, revenge tour coming. I'm curious how Anthony Davis is like emotional fire and wanting to prove something there too, because on the other side of this coin is Anthony Davis, who is not a top 5 player in the league, but a really good player, has been the incoming piece in like the worst trade ever. How does that?
And he was a top 5 player in the first 3 weeks of this season.
Yeah, true.
And he was probably, if you had to vote on the second week of November, he's probably MVP.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. With this trade in particular, for both the Lakers and the Mavs, relevant to what they are this season, which I know isn't the main thrust of this trade, but I do want to see what happens after Thursday with them, because I find myself like getting excited about some things with Dallas in the immediate, but then I go to like, who else is going to create for this team from the perimeter outside of Kyrie? And I wonder what they're going to be able to do, or what kid's going to be able to find within their roster currently to take a little bit of that offensive creation and just scoring, self-created scoring burden off of Kyrie. Because I think, I don't know, but if they're able to figure out something there that satisfies that concern I have, then I could start getting myself pretty excited about Derek Lively coming back, and, Lively as the primary on Nikola Jokic with Anthony Davis coming over. like Rudy Gobert did in the conference semis,
Right.
in Wolves Nuggets last season against Jokic. Like that stuff really intrigues me. Just being able to kind of delete some of the Thunder's perimeter penetration, drive and kick sort of game, just having Anthony Davis and Derek Lively out there. But I don't know. I don't know what that's going to be. And I always feel like I've learned my lesson in assuming things are going to be cleaner sooner than they are. But there is a part of the Maverick side of this that I'm intrigued by too.
Oh, I agree. And if Davis is properly motivated, and you're right about the ball creation. I mean, I don't know who they get. What's fascinating is that both teams traded into existing strengths. I mean, LeBron James is going to be adjusting heavily to the idea that he is no longer the best creator on the floor. When was the last time that happened? You know, I mean, and on the other hand, Anthony Davis is going to probably, in my opinion, the springiest, coolest pair of forwards in the game right now.
Yep.
You know, I mean, Lively and Gafford are both. Gafford is extremely underrated.
He's having a great season.
He's having a great season. He destroyed the Wolves when they played him last time, 12 for 15 or something, and just gobbling up everything. So, yeah, I mean, you know, actually, I was just thinking, you know, Julius Randle on the Lakers.
I can't even wrap my it. The Lakers or the Mavs?
The Lakers, they need a forward. They need a big. They need a center, you know.
Oh, Julius Randle's a center now?
Well, I mean, I think he's more valuable as a center.
You do like how he guards bigs, yeah. It's been a weird trade deadline season for me in that I just think we don't, just of how I cover the trade deadline or talk about it, is I normally go off of this has happened before when a team was in this situation, and here, you know, here's how they kind of rolled it out from there. I just do think we're playing a board game with different rules right now, that we don't even understand the rules and with how the second apron and the new collective bargaining agreement impacts all of this.
Totally agree with that. I would also say that we are dealing with players whose reputations are in flux. Sure. Jimmy Butler's reputation. What is Jimmy Butler's reputation right now? I think it varies widely. What is Kevin Durant's reputation right now? When the rubber meets the road, can Kevin Durant be a guy who will get you a ring? Well, since the Warriors, 3 or 4 teams have thought so. And they have all been sorely disappointed. So, again, Kevin Durant is a sexy name and Jimmy Butler is a slightly less sexy name. But how much, you get those guys, you're moving the needle toward a ring. And if you don't get it, then you're on that treadmill of trying to get off it again. And that is an interesting thing to look at. Jimmy Butler is obviously not as coveted. He said he wants to go to Phoenix, fine. And Bradley Beal has a no trade clause. I mean, all these things are wrapped up in it. But the only reason those teams are talking now is because Butler has played himself off a team for at least a third time. You could, what do you call the Bulls and the Sixers? Somewhere along in there, you would add a third or fourth team. And Durant has been swept out of the playoffs 2 of the last 3 seasons, if memory serves. So, again, the sexy names, that matters to the marketing guy on a team. That should not matter to the personnel guy on a team. What should matter is how sustainable is this fit? How close are we? Does this make the difference? Because in the current CBA, you're talking supermax guys mostly, and you're talking guys with a lot of tread on the tires. And we don't know when KG and Butler are going to fall off a cliff. They both have paths that would indicate that it's going to be not that far away.
So to the, De'Aaron Fox isn't as sexy of a name as those two are, but to your kind of goes the other way where the fit does make,
absolutely makes
more
total sense.
And the age curve does there as well. I don't think we're putting the Spurs into title contention here, but again, through the Wolves prism, that's a team that 3 days ago I would have been like, yeah, Wolves greater than Spurs. It's kind of all in the mix now, right?
Sure.
Like I'm not sure that for the rest, I think the Wolves have a handful of game lead on them, but I'm not sure the Wolves are going to have a better record than the Spurs for the rest of the season, even just baking in the idea that Wemby is probably going to get better and better by the game for the next, not just the rest of this season, but the next few there. It is all shaping up to be. I just think it's interesting that these teams we weren't really considering to be contenders 4 days ago or really heavily involved, maybe even teams that could kind of, Dallas, like Luka was hurt. Like maybe Dallas just kind of slips out of it and this turns into more of like a gap year. And for them, you thought some of that and the Spurs were like, okay, maybe next year. Now they're all in the mix with the Wolves who are fighting for this opportunity to be in a not terrible position entering, the playoffs. And that's, it's on Friday, once I piece together what all the trade deadline is and see what the Wolves did or didn't do. I don't know. I think it's going to be a harder environment that they're in the Western Conference than it was last week is my point. And I don't know what the moves are to make, or what the conclusions are to make off of that. Do you start playing younger or do you lean into it even more? And, you hit the Finch button full bore and you're like, we have to maximize and put guys like Minott in the doghouse and limit Rob Dillingham. So it's like, what's going to, what's going to happen here? And that's already kind of been a point of contention, I feel like, with this team.
Absolutely.
And I think it could be that on steroids come the weekend.
Yeah. The one thing I will say is that I do think Portland and San Antonio being the best examples, although if Zion, this is always fraught to say, but if Zion is relatively healthy for even like a 2 or 3 week period, now they've lost Murray. So, it gets dicey, and Ingram may or may not be on the team. I mean, I don't know. All I'm saying is I do think that on any given night, with the exception of the Utah Jazz, any of those other 14 teams in the Western Conference can beat you.
Blazers have won 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10.
And they have a lot of talent. And Klingon and all of those.
Monty Kamara, man. I love that dude.
I know. He's very good. He's exactly the kind of piece you want as your fifth starter, you know? And so, yeah, I mean, the point being, though, is all those teams play each other. So it's like, all right, the Dallas, okay, you're right about Dallas. They may, Davis and all those guys may get up for it. And then, they're going to turn around. In fact, Portland beat Indiana the other night. I mean, Indiana's another team all of a sudden is playing over its head, in my opinion. Kudos to Rick Carlisle, another great job coaching. But there are teams. Houston, is Houston just in a blip, or are they, finally coming back to earth? We don't know. I like Udoka a lot. I like their veteran leadership. Amen Thompson is all of a sudden a beast. If they play the Lakers, that's must-watch TV for me. I mean, that's going to be a lot of fun, and there's a lot of games like that, and it's screw rivalries week. There's a great basketball game on all the time now in the Western Conference. Golden State, what are they going to do at the deadline? I mean, of all teams, that team is, if they stand pat, that's throwing in the towel for Golden State. Or that means that they value their own players too highly, which, again, is going to be, that's what I mean when I'm talking about reputations. You want to pump up your own guys that you're trying to trade as much as possible. But the reality is you're trying to trade them. Why are you trying to trade them?
Let me grab another break here. Today's show is brought to you by Treasure Island Resort and Casino. And this weekend, the KFAN Power Trip is doing a takeover on Thursday and Friday at TI. On Thursday evening, the 6th, they are doing a live initials game in the Island Event Center where they have prize giveaways, including a trip to Las Vegas for the Super Bowl on the weekend. They're broadcasting the morning show from TI on Friday morning from 5:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. And they're doing more over the course of Friday into a concert that evening where Chris Hockey's band is playing. They wanted me to let y'all know about this because presumably if you listen to this show, you are a Minnesota sports fan, Minnesota sports listener, and probably listen to K-Fan. And this would be a fun weekend to get down there for whether it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for the Super Bowl, whatever it might be. They are going to be there, and I think it'd be a good idea to check out if you're looking for something to do this weekend. For more information, specifics of what that schedule is with the KFAN Power Trip Takeover, go to ticasino.com. All right, we're jumping around a little bit, and maybe let's go a little bit more Wolves centric, and this I'm sure will be related to the deadline as well. But Britt wrote a column that came out yesterday, that came out on Tuesday, that was broadly about the clutch time play of this team and the disparity of their execution in close games in the fourth quarter relative to the the rest of the games, the other 43 minutes. There's what I really like about the topic and how you tied it in is there is an Ant relevance to this, there is a Finch relevance to this, and there is a Tim Connelly roster construction relevance to this. So I'll let you just kind of start with that, but I have some thoughts on the topic as well, because those are all tied together, and I think at different times each of those three people get blamed for the poor play in clutch time. So yeah, what inspired this? And yeah, let's talk through it.
Well, what inspired it was actually the raw numbers. It was actually Alan Horton tweet. By the way, if you're not following Alan Horton, who's the radio play-by-play guy on Twitter, he just dumps stats out there that are extremely smart, very, very on point relative to what has just happened or what is about to happen. You'll become an immensely more intelligent Wolves watcher if you, for that matter, if you listen to him on the radio, which I rarely do because I like to watch the games. But his Twitter feed is great, and he was the one that said they had the most blown fourth quarter leads. And so I began to look at it, and I guess the sexy stat, which I came up with, not in the column, but in trying to figure out ways to tease the column, is that the Wolves have played 2,410 minutes this year. 50 games at 4,800 minutes is 2,400, and 10 minutes is 2 5-minute overtimes that they played. Mm-hmm. Of those 2,410, 2,303 have been non-clutch minutes. So all but 107 minutes have been non-clutch minutes. The Wolves have outscored their opponents by 206 points in those 2,303 minutes. In the 107 minutes, which is obviously 5%, less than 5% of the other stuff, clutch time, they have been outscored by 55 points. Mm-hmm. And understand that clutch minutes, the minute you get beyond 6 points or you're outside of 5 minutes, you're no longer in clutch time. So it does reflect. I mean, if the Wolves are getting blown out in clutch time, and they were within 2 and suddenly they lose by 20, that's not minus 18. That's minus 4. They suddenly go from minus 2 to minus 6. So minus 55 is a lot. They have more games than anybody in clutch time, 31, yet they're only 5th in minutes. And I think that's because they lose quickly, and they're no longer in that clutch time. Their net rating is minus 16.3. There are only 2 teams in the NBA that have a worse net rating in clutch time. They are the Wizards and the Jazz, who happen to own the 2 worst records in the NBA. Now, why is that significant? It's because the Jazz and the Wizards, by nature, are terrible teams. They're just playing the way they always play in clutch time. Maybe a little worse, but it still comes down to the fact that relative to the other 28 teams, they are terrible. The Wolves are not. The Wolves go down to that level after not being at that level all the other times. So another way to look at it, if you want to get blunt about it, is the Wolves choke more egregiously than any team in the NBA. So and they do it on offense and defense, by the way, real quick before you jump in.
No, go ahead.
It's net rating 113.3 for the regular season thus far, 105.5, 100.5. So 12.8 points fewer scored for 100 possessions. On defense, 110.2 for the regular season, 116.8 in the clutch. That's almost 7 points worse. Put it together, and it's 19.5 points worse per 100 possessions during clutch. And that's that's too big, even though it's only 107 minutes. It's too big of a sample size compared to 50 games that we're into right now. Something is fundamentally wrong with the chemistry, composition, unity, synergy of this team to have that happen.
So I want to take Ant for my one to go into, and then we could tag team in on Finch and Connelly if we want to. But I was rewatching the game, the Kings game last night, and this isn't clutch time. This is the end of the second half, but it's functionally the same thing, right? There's 17 seconds on the game clock. There's 16 seconds on the shot clock. The Wolves are holding for one shot here. And, Rudy Gobert is going to come up and set a screen for Anthony Edwards, which has been the Wolves' entirety of their offense, right? The whole night. And what do we know how the Kings play? And the fourth time they played him,
right?
They blitz him every single time. If it's Sabonis, or in this case, it's Trey Lyles coming up with Rudy to defend the pick and roll against Ant and Rudy. They're gonna bring that up. But I thought this was so interesting that watch what Trey Lyles does here on this play is he just tries to block Rudy from even getting to the pick and roll. He's like, no, we don't even want you guys to run a pick and roll, because actually, Ant, you're doing a pretty good job of picking us apart. When you do see that blitz coverage, you've been finding Rudy on the short roll. You've actually been splitting it a couple times. You've been getting off of it, because Ant, to his credit, has learned this coverage.
Yeah.
And he sees it all the time, right? 2 on the ball. We've talked about this. Double teams. I got to talk to MJ, whatever. Like, whatever it is, Ant has learned when it's that coverage over and over again how to do it. When Trey Lyles, and I've noticed this from a lot of teams to the point of clutch time, at end of games, they just switch what they're doing. And I'm pretty sure the goal is just to confuse Ant. So Trey Lyles is here boxing out Rudy like, nope, you're not even going to be able to screen this. And just in that time, it confuses it, and Ant thinks they're going to be up blitzing. But what ends up happening is Trey Lyles kind of spins out of it, and here he is. He's in a drop right now. And so Ant's just like coming over. The clock's winding down. There's 6 seconds on the shot clock. He's got to do something, but it's a different coverage than he was expecting, and, he kind of fumbles the ball away. And Ant's,
he drove into Nas in the corner, too. He ruined the spacing.
Exactly. And I'm not even like, I'm not trying to like come at Ant. Like that's complicated, right?
Yeah,
You know,
right.
he's learned how to punish drop this year, but he's just like, I'm just going to become the best off the dribble 3-point shooter in the league, not named Steph Curry. That go right, left, step back, whatever. He can kill that. He has answers for every coverage. The problem is knowing what that coverage is and recognizing it in the moment.
Right.
And the most aggressive, technical, funky coverages in games come in clutch time, right? And I think that's a big part of why the Wolves, from an offensive execution standpoint, have, to those numbers that you just rattled off, well, the offense is a lot worse. They're still running high pick and rolls with Ant and Rudy in the third quarter and the first quarter and the whatever quarter they're doing it. It's, to me, it's about how teams are guarding Ant at these times differently than it is in other situations. And that just kind of confusing Ant and the Wolves offense overall to a point where the effectiveness is depressed and you end up being a team that's been outscored by 55 points in 107 clutch minutes, to your point. So that's the Ant thing that I'm on.
Yeah, and I think it's also significant to realize that the Wolves are third in the NBA in three-point accuracy. Okay, they are 28th in the clutch. They go from 36-8 or something to they barely make a quarter of their threes in the clutch, 25.3%. And Ant obviously is a huge part of that. He's 42.1% from deep this season. He is 28.2 in the clutch. He gets no help. Mike Conley is 12.5%. Now that's probably like 2 for 12 or something. There's not a lot of people shooting threes besides Ant at crunch time. But Nas in 23.6 minutes, which by the way is criminally low, is 0 for 2 from three. I mean, if you can't figure out that Nas Reed on the wing should be a part of your clutch offense, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, Nas Reed at the top of the key should be part of any clutch offense. Mm-hmm. He spreads the floor. He can go off the bounce. Now, I will grant you that the big issue on Nas that is yet to be determined, jury's still out, is whether or not he can be a good clutch performer. It's not something that he has done well. And right now, I mean, his net rating it's very few minutes, as I just said, but it's like minus 43. And he had a game where he just was terrible there. Anyway, like a Joe Ingles-like game. But anyway, there isn't a player on the team that is noticeably better in the clutch. And a definition of insanity if something doesn't work and you keep doing it. And now it's time to switch to Finch.
I think you already did start by switching to Finch by being like, Nas hasn't been out there. And I will just start, I'm going to let you go on Finch, but there has been more Nas in the clutch this season compared to a season ago, or allowed to close more games because they were going to close with Rudy and Cat last season. So there's more, but I co-sign everything you say. And even if you're in a position where you're Finch and you're like, I got to close this game with Rudy and Julius out there. Well, and I'm here raising the flag of like, play Nas at the 3 then. I don't know. Cause to your point, I don't get why in a clutch offensive situation, you just wouldn't want him out there one pass away.
Your guy who's hitting over 50% of his shots in the entire month of January from 3. I'm not talking about just in general. I'm talking 45 for 80 in the month of January. And he didn't really stop. He got injured that other game, but then he came in the first quarter of his game back from injury. Boom, 4 threes. So let's find out if Nas misses a lot of shots in clutch, whether he grooms into it and becomes a serious clutch player. Because, again, this is an argument. Julius Randle has played 43.5. Nas has played 23.6. and Randall's been hurt more than Nas this year. So Randall plays over Nas in the clutch, but it's not working. So, all right, if you want Randall out there, and by the way, his numbers are not bad compared to the others. He's actually hitting 40% from three. He's only hit 2 for 5, but still. The greater point is you can use your rotation all you want, but when you are in the clutch, you are laying your markers down on all bets. It's like roulette. The wheel is spinning now, and what numbers your coins are on is what your savings are all about. And so what we see is Jaden is second to Ant. Ant's at 102.5 of those 107 minutes. And I guarantee you the other ones were when he was out for the Washington game, which had some clutch time. Jaden is 97.7 minutes. Gobert is 93.8 minutes. And then you get down to Connelly, 46.3, Randall, 43.5, Nah, 38.8. And Dillingham, just a few, and I think it was probably
surprised me any. Yeah,
he has a very good rating, but it's like 3 minutes.
I think it's important to stay away from ratings,
exactly.
with 100. I mean, you could talk about it the team globally,
right?
Individually. I mean, it's what I think the way to summarize it is the clutch time to me feels like the start of games so often has been. Right. How bad the starters were, and how many times it's been like, all right, it's 18-6. And we're 7 minutes into the game, Wolves offense can't score. It feels like that to me. And that's because oftentimes, maybe this is a Finch thing, the clutch time lineup is the starting lineup. And the Wolves starting lineup is more susceptible to good defensive coverages, not just for the Ant things I was talking about, because Jaden McDaniels hasn't been a reliable three-point shooter this season. Rudy Gobert isn't a three-point shooter at all. Julius Randle isn't like a guy that you're, so you have exacerbated spacing issues with more complicated coverages on your primary scorer, and everything's dropping from, of course, the numbers are going down.
Which is why, I mean, what you didn't say there, which is obvious, though, anyway, is they miss Cat, because Cat would deliver that. Well, who's the Cat facsimile on this roster? It's Nas. So, again, you want a big who can take it off the bounce. If they blitz you with a big out on the perimeter, that's fine. All of a sudden, you get it off the bounce, and, you either make the pass or you finish the hoop. I think that not only personnel, but Finch is not taking the reins strongly enough in terms of play calls and specific instructions as to exactly what he wants to do. I've been seeing way too much two-man game at the top with Ant and somebody, and we'll ride with whatever the defense reacts to. I remember the days when Chris Finch pulled a guy blitzing down the court from the half-court line that hit him, and he ran in for a layup. Some guy that, I can't remember who it was, but it was like
Wancho.
It was the fourth option.
Yeah.
Blast from the past. All righty. Well, anyway, so exactly. And so I want a little ingenuity. The guy, everybody makes fun of the fact that, Tim Connelly has called him an offensive genius, and so has Cat on occasion. And the record of what his offenses have done certainly does not back that up. But
hold on. We have documented on the record from Ant and the players in clutch time situations recently that they've gone rogue. That Ant has literally gone rogue on play calls at the end of games there. I'm not putting this all on Ant. I'm saying all of these things, they tie together. Ant is related to Finch and the personnel that Finch puts on the floor and the play calls that he does. But Finch can't save that himself. And Ant can't save the game himself, depending on what the personnel and the play calls are there. And then that is tied to Tim Connelly, who's put this roster together
at a weird time.
Yeah,
he scrambled it we underestimated it. He obviously underestimated it. I defend the trade and will continue to defend the trade. I'm comfortable doing that despite what Cat is doing right now. I just think that what this team would be looking at with Cat on the roster in the next couple of years is you're going to ruin. Ant would probably be walking out the door, I think, at some point in time. And then not to say he won't anyway, but you do have to figure out what you're going to do with Randall. And they committed to Randall in a way that this is how we started the podcast. They are committed to him, I think, to at least this season. And they are hoping that they do get traction and everything does come together. And let's face it, there are, more than 30 games left in the season. And how many times have we seen teams make a March run into April? And, Dallas last year made the finals that way with a record not that dissimilar to what the Wolves have right now. So I'm not saying it's hopeless, but I am saying that what we've seen for 50 games is a search that is both dogged and conservative. It is, we're keeping these guys and we're going to massage this thing until it works. And we are going to stay with it. And yeah, we can get a Jalen Clark and a Rob Dillingham in there. But when it comes to clutch time, all right, if we Finch likes Clark because he knows Clark will do one thing. Yeah. He won't go rogue, but the idea that everybody isn't just merrily rolling along on the same page because that's what needs to be done with a team with legitimate championship bona fides and ambitions, which is what this team looked like at the beginning of the year, that's been discredited. What we're seeing now is a team that's having difficulty literally getting out of its own fucking way. And that's on Connelly, that's on Finch, that's on Ant, that's on Gobert, that's on Mike Conley. Those are the guys. Conley runs the offense in clutch time. Gobert captains the defense in crunch time. Ant is the straw that stirs the drink in crunch time. Finch is the guy who orchestrates it. Conley is the guy who gave them the blueprints. All of them are at fault.
So then let's do the Tim Connelly part of this. It becomes incumbent upon Tim Connelly to make a change if the read is that the starting lineup that we've been talking about, struggles to fit together offensively and get offensive traction, which then has a kind of mirroring effect at the end of games where those things come back together again for some of the X's and O's and Ant reasons that we were talking about before. It becomes incumbent upon Tim Connelly to assess this and be like, okay, is this a roster construction issue or is this a Ant growth and Finch management issue, things that he believes in, taking care of itself. And if Tim Connelly doesn't make a trade, or even particularly if he commits to Julius Randle longer term, what that is really signaling is a belief that Ant is going to figure this out and that Finch has enough and needs to maybe isn't making the perfect decisions in these times right now, but can make good decisions once Ant's processing and computation kind of skills of this are growing. You know what I'm saying? It kind of feels like Connelly is third in that line of like, all right, I understand what Ant has done. I understand what Finch has done. And now it's my turn to make a move. I just don't know if that time to make that move in his head is now 50 games into the season, or if he wants to see more of it and thus wait into the off season to make that Randle trade or make that commitment to Randle in terms of a contract extension.
Okay. And so what I would say is Finch and Connelly talk every day and they are a hive mind. I'm sure there are disagreements and I'm sure that Dillingham and Randle are in the mix of what they talk about a lot. But the strategy they have signed on to has been vetted. And a devil's advocate would say, well, wait a minute. Before Randall just got hurt, they won 5 in a row against some pretty good competition, and things have begun to gel. And I felt that way too.
Right.
But guess what? If you can't sustain some injuries and not beat Washington and or Sacramento at home, with the schedule you got coming up, you play OKC 3 times in February. That, you might get 1 win, and that's optimistic. So there's 2 losses. You play the Rockets, you play the Cavs, you play the Bucks.
It's tough.
You play a Portland team that's won 9 out of 10, you say, or whatever. And other teams have consistently played shorthanded. The Wolves have benefited from that on the other end. So if this strategy was supposed to work and you were dogged and conservative about it, and your record is 27-23, I don't know. I mean, it isn't like Dillingham hasn't shown flashes. It isn't like, you can't use Clark and you can't figure out ways to, pair people in the lineups. It just, what I want to see is experimentation. I am tired of it being something where they're saying either we need more information and research on how these pairings work, or that these pairings work and they're on the brink of working even better. Yeah. I don't think either one of those things is necessarily true, but what I do know is that it de facto reduces your options in terms of how you can meaningfully going forward. If you're not playing the kids in non-clutch minutes, you certainly are not going to play them in clutch minutes, and you're going to lose that. I remember, one of the purposes of this whole thing is to get Ant into the postseason multiple times during his development period. Well, Dillingham makes a lot of mistakes, and I am not a Dillingham stan. I go back and forth with him, quite frankly. But I acknowledge that Mike Conley took forever to get aggressive in that Sacramento Kings game. He had shots that he turned down on numerous occasions that I don't think he turns down last year.
Right.
And all of a sudden he hits a very important 3 at the time. Finally, Dillingham would not be timid, and maybe he'd miss, but and it would be obvious if they lose a game in the clutch because Dillingham is out there. It would be easy for Finch to say, see there, okay, but 18 times you've lost already when you're in the clutch. So don't tell me that your solution is better. You guys are ahead of only the 2 worst teams in the NBA in the clutch. So I think it's time to tweak.
I do too. It's one of those things where I find myself like looking for the why isn't he? Why isn't he tweaking? Like what are the what are the reasons? And again, I was rewatching the Wolves Kings game last night, and the explanation Finch has given us for why a Josh Minott is removed from the rotation or Rob Dillingham's minutes are limited is, quote, game plan mistakes, right? Just execution of what that is, and understandable in a young player like Rob Dillingham, right? Understandable in a player who hasn't got an opportunity in Josh Minott. But who also has a ton of game plan mistakes and is still an incredible player is Anthony Edwards. And I just think Finch, maybe dogmatically so to a fault, is like, we only have so much bandwidth for game plan mistakes.
I hate that. I hate that explanation. You are absolutely right, because he basically, what he does is he treats like 4 extra minutes as like this huge, it's like a Jenga piece gets taken out and the rotation just collapses. No, somebody doesn't play 4 minutes. Or 2 players play 2 minutes less or whatever. And I get the combinations, but that's why I asked him the other day, about, I led by saying about rotations. With all these injuries, do you have a good idea about the rotations? And he said, well, I've got this and this. And I said, when it comes to the kids, do you have any idea how you're going to play them tonight? And he just looked at me and said, no.
And he did. Yeah.
All right, then, but it's, you don't have DiVincenzo. You don't have Randall. You didn't have Ant one night. You didn't have Nas for 3/4 of a game. And I will tell you, I enjoyed the period of time where he began to fiddle with Rudy, Nas, and Randall in terms of closing minutes. I like that. There's a little friction there. There's a little tension that I think is really good for a team that is struggling to do things. Put a little uncertainty into it. Tell Mike Conley, I want you shooting. I've said it to you a dozen times to start the games. Well, guess what? In the clutch, as the 37-year-old, 18-year veteran who's running the floor, if you're not smart enough to know that they're giving you that shot if you want it, then I'm going to throw Rob in there because he needs to learn that sooner rather than later.
Funny thing, though, is Conley did do that in the last game. He did get aggressive in the clutch, and he had the driving basket there, and then he had the big corner three. But yeah,
it was at the same time. If you look at like the 6 or 7 possessions before that,
sure, yep,
he recognized it too late. He should have been doing that. He got off the ball. It's the old. How many times are we going to see the weave on the perimeter that just basically tries to sort out how they're switching, who is going to go where? It's like this. It's a preamble. It's like somebody who gets to the podium and introduces the guests. Nobody's locked in. You're just waiting for people to actually say something that means something.
Yeah,
with the Wolves, you're trying to figure out, all right, when are you going to start your play?
It's like castling in chess or something. Where you're like, it's not an attack move, but it's like repositioning the board, and then I guess speed chess, because then it's then there's 14. Yeah, then there's 14 seconds left on the shot clock, and this is like way more big picture and down the line. I think as Ant's understanding of the game, computation of it, his individual game plan mistakes go down. I'm telling you, for this team, it might be 2 years from now, there is going to be an exponential trampolining effect of that, because once they can let go of protecting Ant's decision making, you can take further risks elsewhere.
That's a really good point.
You know what I'm saying? And because like Conley and Gobert, they're conservative options. Closing with Joe Ingles the other game is a conservative option because you're not. I know Ant was not that, but like it's this whole idea where Finch is just trying to play conservative, check, and once Ant can just be the elite scorer that he is, while also the elite puzzle solver, the Luka element of it, well, then he actually, he becomes on Luka's level, maybe even above it at some point, because he is a better scorer, better athlete, all of those sort of things. It's a lot of the issues that this team, or I think even people following the team, run into, is Ant just isn't quite there yet, which has, kind of a snowballing effect elsewhere on on the team, and specifically at the beginning of games and in clutch time, beginning of games when he's not locked in or figuring out how he's going to play that night. And then in the clutch when teams are guarding him differently. You get more of that. You get more Rob. You get more, I think, aggression from Finch. But I think there's just going to be a conservatism to it until if Finch is the coach, until Ant has more of that put together. And maybe Conley has to give him a better roster too, or a better fitting roster there. But I like how we framed all this, where all three hold blame: Anthony Edwards, Chris Finch, and Tim Connelly, for the things that are missing right now. But there are threads connecting all three, and some that go, all the way through all three of them.
And I mean, what I did in the column, why are they having chemistry problems? They're having chemistry problems because the trade happened at a certain time and discombobulated things. I think a really underrated portion of this is that when a team overachieves and really wants to duplicate it, it's much easier said than done. I mean, Atlanta is the sorry lesson about it, but I mean, there are teams that don't have to take an Atlanta step backward, but you do. I mean, Dallas under Luka got to the playoffs a couple times and did some really interesting things, and then had a terrible season where they almost fell out, and they did fall out.
And picked up Derek Lively.
And so, but this, at the very least, this needs to be a good lesson in regrouping. And if this team loses in the first round, let's say, which I'd say winning in the first round and no more, or losing in the first round, are the two most probable outcomes for this team going forward right now, until we see other evidence.
Well, and the first one is the most likely before winning in the first round and then losing in the second round is losing in the first round. I mean, they're the 7 or 8 seed right now. I mean, what 7 or 8 seed ever would we be like? Actually, the most likely outcome is they win their first round series. It just is. I mean, I believe they could, and for all the reasons of they piece.
But I don't think they're going to be the 7th seed. I mean, again, sounds weird coming from me now, but I do think that Finch teams have traditionally gotten better late.
But let's not talk about both sides of our mouth, though, because he's doing it conservatively. I think is and playing the not playing the young guys and playing the things
right. I know
that do win. Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah,
it is confusing, but it will be interesting to see. I still think they're going to have trouble in the clutch, and I think that's going to hurt them. I do.
Yeah.
But I also think that if they get healthy again, to be honest with you, there's way too much still to come. We're talking 24 hours before the trade deadline, so I'm not going to say any further because I have no idea what it's going to look like. It may be that, Tim Connelly does not usually sit back and wait during the trade deadline. That is not his habit.
Right. No, right. And so that's what I'm thinking about this. And I'm getting the signals that it is a sit back and wait. It is a sit back and wait. I'm like, man, that's not the Tim Connelly I know. But I said this earlier, Britt, like where Tim Connelly is not sitting back. Well, he is sitting back and waiting at the moment, but he's sitting back and waiting within the second apron. That is different than 2 years ago when he was sitting back and waiting for the Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker trade to happen. Right. It's different in way, because it was the offseason of sitting back and waiting for the Knicks to eventually put Dante DiVincenzo into the trade. There's where Tim Connelly's feet are standing right now is different than the other times he's been sitting back and waiting and popped up and done something. I'm not saying he couldn't pop up and do something too. I'm just the land that he's standing on is different than it was, when he made the Gobert trade, the D'Lo trade, the Cat trade, any of those. Just a different landscape.
I agree. What I will say though is I think that the fact that there are big names out there, $40 and $50 million names, means that a $30 million player might get involved in a multi-team deal.
Sure.
And I would think rather than a straight swap of I want Julius Randle, it might be that, hey, if we take the 31 from Minnesota and give them this,
sure,
that makes more sense to me than, and I actually think that if Randle gets dealt, it will be as like the third biggest name in the deal.
Sure. And again, that's what we've been kind of hypothesizing for a month, of like,
right.
Yeah. And maybe within the context of that, it's a multi-team trade. And so you lose some of the restrictions of a 1-for-1 trade.
Right.
And then, so maybe within that you do attach on
You get
the
a
Detroit pick, or
right.
maybe you attach
no,
to
you
the
give
Detroit
a pick, right.
and you get something, you get something back in it that isn't, that makes more sense to you in the long term than the Julius Randle does. I mean, I'm sorry I don't have, to listeners, that we don't have a better idea, but this has been, kind of the sense I've gotten over the course of the last month. I thought there'd be some more tea leaves to read, but I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the tea leaves, or haven't heard things, but maybe this just is. There weren't any because they've been planning on keeping Julius, and the Tim Connelly column of this is holding steady.
He's going for it. He's going for it with existing personnel. They're saying, all right, we'll ride or die with this lineup and this configuration of the roster. And if Pratt falls, then we have a whole summer to pick up the pieces and reorganize. That is not a ridiculous position. It is not a position that it's a position that has some risk to it, and you can. I mean, the worst case scenario is that you cannot avoid Julius Randle being on your roster next year, and you have to accommodate that $31 million, and that's when you're either a repeater or second apron, and
there's fallout from that. Yeah,
you certainly can't sign Nah then. So
it's. I mean, it'll be a good thing to assess in 48 hours when we have more clarity and know come Thursday evening that the Wolves cannot make another trade until the offseason.
Right.
And so let's assess that now. But I think we did a good job today of like kind of trying to lay the groundwork of understanding where this team is at in the moment, which isn't a terrible place. In 27 and 23, they are injured. Ant has grown in many ways, but in other ways, this roster hasn't grown, and they run into issues at specific times, like the start of games. And as you really highlighted well in your piece in the clutch there, I think this is a team, finding its way, and that just wasn't the expectation for this season.
Right.
It's pretty rare that a team is finding its way a season after going to the Western Conference Finals, but that's what's happening.
The financial and personnel reality of the NBA right now. I mean, right now the Dallas Mavericks and the Los Angeles Lakers are suddenly finding their way. So
exactly right. So I don't know, man. We will see what happens. Y'all listeners, you should check out Britt's column. That has a lot of some of this clutch conversation was interesting to you, and it's kind of hard to find sometimes on like NBA.com where these clutch numbers are. Britt did a really good job of kind of like aggregating that together, putting it into his piece. And if you haven't looked into that stuff before, it can be pretty illuminating, particularly if you've been watching these games. You kind of know what it looks like and what it's felt like and what has been and hasn't been happening. So check that out over at MimPost, and you can also follow him on Blue Sky and Twitter at Britt Robson. The plan with the schedule going forward is Kyle and I are going to do an episode tomorrow, Thursday after the deadline. And so we'll talk with the Wolves do play the Bulls here tonight. So I'm sure depending on whether or not the Wolves make a trade, we'll determine how much, we're talking about the trade deadline tomorrow afternoon versus that Wolves Bulls game. But we'll keep moving with this thing. And if a big trade happens, enter chaos mode, and we'll figure it out from there. Britt, appreciate you doing it.
Sure.
Again, check that out over at MinPost. Follow him on Twitter, Blue Sky, at Britt Robson. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. yeah, until Thursday afternoon with Kyle, he's Britt, I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.